Welcome, welcome, people. We'll give it a minute or two for everybody to hop on. You're just joining us, feel free to drop in the chat your name, your location, the reason or reasons you came today. Love to see where everybody is from, where everybody is located.
Thank you all so much for sharing your evening with us. We're really excited to have so many curious and excited people.
Love to see all the names and locations in the chat.
Yep, a lot of familiar names and faces, and then some that I don't know, which I'd love to see.
Again, if you're just joining us, go ahead and throw your name and your location, maybe the reason you came tonight, into the chat. We're going to give people another 30 seconds or so to join us, and then we'll go ahead and get started.
We will also be recording this for anyone who joins late, or if you have to hop off early, or if you have people in your network who were really excited about this but unable to swing this on a Wednesday evening. This will be available if you just want to watch it all again.
They might want to go back and catch, some key points. It's very possible. Oh, look at Liz getting the love in the chat.
It's mutual. Asking nicely is going to be one of the themes of the evening. Get more flies with honey, right?
Absolutely.
Yes, we'll provide a link to this later. All right, shall we get started?
Let's
Be
do it.
respectful of everyone's time. Thank you all so much for joining us this evening. My name is Liz White. I'm the Executive Director of Upvote Virginia. We're a nonpartisan, nonprofit organization. We specifically advocate for good government initiatives and kind of some political innovations, specifically things like ranked choice voting, nonpartisan redistricting, things that make government work better for all voters. But we are very, very excited to join with one of our national partners, represent us, to host this evening, which will talk about how to advocate for whatever it is you care about. I love it if it's ranked choice voting, but it doesn't have to just be ranked choice voting. It can be whatever, whatever inspires you, whatever is motivating you to get involved and reach out to your legislators. We're going to hear about kind of the status of where Virginia politics are after last week's elections. And we're going to hear from Amanda Putz on just her expertise on how to message, why to message, different medium for messaging to your legislators, and just really how to make your time and effort the most effective to move the needle on what you care about. So we're joined by a couple guest panelists. We've got our pair of Chris's, and we will get to them in a moment, but I wanted to just thank you all for coming. Thank Rep Us for partnering with us on this event. Rep Us is a spectacular organization. They are anti-corruption. They were kind of one of the OG orgs that looked around and said, you know what the problem is that the incentive structure is all wrong, and politicians are all motivated by the wrong things, like money and power and keeping their seats safe. And launched a national initiative that is still growing and pulling along state groups like us to, again, just make government work better. So Amanda has been a spectacular collaborator on this, and I'm thrilled to be here with her tonight. I'm going to hand the program over to her. Thank you, Amanda.
Thanks, Liz, and thanks to everybody else for coming out tonight. You're tuning in from wherever you are via the technology known as Zoom. Nonetheless, we're happy to have you here, and I could say all the great things about Liz as well in terms of collaborating and putting this little event on for all of us. So I always like to start a training just kind of going over what goals do we have? What do we hope people walk away with at the end of the evening? So I've got 5 main goals, or 5 big goals. First, we want to, as Liz said, we want to kind of check in with Virginia's current political landscape. What does it look like following the most recent election? 2, we want to determine reasons to contact legislators. There's more than you might think. Number 3, we want to learn various means to contact legislators. 4, we want to develop an effective message. And number 5, we want to prepare to take action. Hopefully we'll get through all 5 of those this evening, and people then are also ready to get inspired and have a little fun. I always like to kind of have those sub goals just to keep us all focused. All right. On that note, I'm going to introduce one of the first Chris's. This is Chris Saxman. If you don't know Chris, let me tell you just a little bit about him. Executive Director of Virginia Free, an organization that's really advocating for pro-business government. But pertinent to this conversation, he was also a member of the Virginia House of Delegates from 2002 to 2010. And so we are super excited that he could join us today to share a little bit about his expertise and how the Virginia political landscape looks right now in the state legislature. So without further ado, I will pass the microphone, metaphorically speaking, over to Chris. Thanks for being here.
Well, thank you for having me, Liz. I wouldn't do this for anyone on vacation, but I do it for Liz. So thanks for all your hard work and trying to make Virginia the best place to do business and raise a family. Virginia Free is also very interested in good government. And so we have taken upon ourselves, and one initiative we have right now is to have proportional seating in both chambers according to the composition of the Senate and the House. It should be in the rules. We believe it should be in the rules that whatever the composition percentage of Democrats, Republicans is should be reflected on every committee, subcommittee, and legislative commission. And we're working hard on that as part of our good government package. Anyway, served 4 terms in the Virginia General Assembly and the House Delegate 2002 to 2010, and most recently ran Winsome Sears' PAC after actually established the PAC and her transition team and inauguration after the election, and left that in March of this year, getting back to my nonpartisan reality with Virginia Free. But Virginia's political landscape always shifts and changes because we have an election every year. And that's one of the great exhausting elements of politics in Virginia. We have an election every year. There are no days off, and that's recognizing what has happened since the election on Tuesday. We've gone right into the 24 cycle and the 25 cycle with people announcing for governor. It happens that quickly in Virginia. Going into this election, we had 70 Democrats and 70 Republicans, and now coming out of the elections, we have 72 and 68. So while it was a momentous, expensive, well-publicized campaign, it was not that much of a change, and the differences in the vote totals between the House and the Senate was inside the 1% recount margin statewide. So I want to emphasize that because Virginia is a deeply divided and closely divided state. Our congressional delegation is 6-5. The most recent statewide election in 21 was less than 2 points when Glenn Youngkin beat Terry McAuliffe. And as one political scientist from Hollins University, Ed Lynch, calls this bright purple Virginia. I want to underscore that as we talk about the momentous and historic redistricting that took place, in which we swept out of office, one way or the other, over 650 years of combined legislative experience. 650 years plus is going to be not returning in January. That means there's a lot of new faces in the legislature, a lot of inexperienced faces in the legislature who have just gotten elected in very partisan elections and are going to be coming in trying to return the favor to those people who elected them. So you're going to have a clash of those realities, especially when you consider that 90% of the legislature, 90%, their real election is the nomination phase, which means for the House of Delegates, they are 15 months away from their next election. 15 months. In June of 2025 is their real election. Voting begins in May, early May of that cycle. That compresses the Virginia calendar and makes things extremely tense in the short session, the second year of the two-year term for House members. Senate members who just got elected, we had, I think, 42% brand new members of the Senate. 42% is an extraordinary amount of turnover. I forget the actual number, 18 or 19 new members of the Senate coming in. And that's for the body that's supposed to be slowing things down. That's going to be a real challenge because the people who used to do that are no longer there. And you have new leadership positions. Scott Sturvell is the new majority leader. I don't know who won for the Republicans. I've been texting, trying to find out today for the Senate leadership. But the dynamics are very different because
it's
there's
McDougal.
Did he win? Oh, good.
Yeah.
That's great for me because I lived with Ryan for 4 years when I was in the House. So, no, he's a good guy. So the dynamic between these very intense partisan districts where the real reelection is within the party is going to demand that they are feeding their base versus looking to do compromise situations. They're not going to feast on the compromise to go back home and say, hey, look, I made this great deal with the other side. 90% of them really can't say that. It's not in their best interest. It's not in their inherent best interest politically. Those 10%, though, in the House and the Senate are going to be very expensive races. Pretty much the same districts that we saw this year are going to be the ones that are going to be heavily contested in 2 years and 4 years. But the Senate, as the Senate is supposed to do, will be taking a 4-year look at things. They don't have to move as quickly. And the governor is going to be up against two political entities in the House Democrats and Senate Democrats who don't like him now. And they don't have to give him anything. And they can run the clock out on Glenn Youngkin in this session. And I'm thinking we're going to see probably a tax increase of some sort. I think they're not going to let him have, that brand coming out of his tenure. And because of the compression of the calendar, the early part of this session coming up is critically important to getting any relatively non-controversial bills out of each chamber and over to the other one. That is in anyone's best interest. I would tell anyone, get your bills out early before they get caught up in the discussion between the House and the Senate when they start taking hostages, and you don't want your bill to be a hostage. And any bill, any time, can be taken hostage. You'll have judge fights, you'll have SEC fights, and a number of very tense situations because you have all these new members who are going to be continuing their campaign. Freshmen never stop campaigning, and it takes a while for them to get their wrists slapped, if you will, and learn the hard way. But there's so many of them this year in both chambers that that dynamic is going to play out. Meanwhile, as an overlay, oh, by the way, the 2024 presidential election is going to be going on, and the bases are going to be even more intense and looking for things to come out of their parties. Recognizing also that Virginia is the first legislature out of the gate in the calendar, national calendar. So all eyes, all cable news eyes and ears are going to be on Virginia. And all it takes is a couple of really, really awful controversial bills dropped in or a controversial event, and it's national and or international news instantaneously. So that's a brief overview. I don't know how much you want to get into that, Liz, but it's a challenging environment. I would stay as nonpartisan as possible, especially on your good election reform, structural reform issues, especially the ranked choice voting. Whenever someone comes up with an objection, bring up the benefits. It's not no, but it's yes and. Yes, I understand your objection. Here's the benefit to what this will end up doing. As much as you like to be in politics and enjoy the game, stay out of the partisanship during session. There's no sense giving anyone who can use the easiest vote possible, which is no easier vote. Let them get to no. You're trying to get people to get to a yes. With progressives, it's usually on the axis of the oppressed versus the oppressor, lifting the oppressed out of the boot of the oppressor. And then for conservatives, the messaging centers around saving civilization from the barbarians. The great book, The Three Languages of American Politics by Arthur Kling, highly recommend it. Short book, 80 pages, but it really gets to the nuts and bolts of what words you want to be using in your messaging. And they are very different when you're talking with different people in different parties. But there are elements that go to the core political philosophy and the emotional vibration of someone in politics along those two axes: oppressor and barbarian civilization for the conservatives. And just a brief overview. I know I'm going quickly, but I want to keep you engaged, and I don't want to take up too much of your time.
Perfect. So to summarize, would it be fair to say, for our purposes, work quickly and efficiently, don't get mired down in the partisan food fights, tailor your message, and rely on positive messaging, it sounds like. Does that sound like I've extrapolated
There's
the
going
right
to be, yes.
things?
Yeah. Well, and then there's going to be the intense debate between the House Democrats and the Senate Democrats. It's always going to be set up that way, and that's going to culminate in the budget. And they're going to have very different opinions on how to spend the taxpayers' money in Virginia, or what they need to do for their priorities, because the House has a different window of return, 15 months. They have to get things done and go home and say, please don't primary me. I'm fine. I'm a good guy. Please, leave me alone. Don't hurt me. Senate Democrats know this, and they're going to be going, well, we got a little bit longer of a forecast here. We can take our time. And that tension always exists, no matter who's in charge of the parties. But it's a very, because of the slim majorities, it's even going to be more intense. But the Senate folks also know that the House members also want to run for the Senate. So there's always that dynamic, and they'll run against them anyway. That's just the nature of politics. So, yeah, if you know
Thank you
people
so
and you can
much.
rely on your relationships, do that. Don't overextend yourself with relationships you don't have, or jeopardize them if you don't know them. I mean, if you really don't know someone and you can get someone else to go in your place and make a more effective pitch, because during session is not a deliberative time. It is a time for decision. Okay, now is a time for deliberation. When you get to the General Assembly in January and February, it is a time for decision. There's 2,000 plus votes in less than 60 days. So,
thank you so much for your insight, Chris. I really appreciate you taking the time out of your vacation and lending your experience and your insight. Thank you so much.
Pleasure. All right, see y'all later. Thank you.
Thanks, Chris.
Bye.
Hey, wow, that gave me a lot to think about. I'm sure all of our attendees are also lots of thoughts running through all of your minds. So why do we have Chris come and give us a little bit of the lay of the land in terms of where Virginia is right now? Why does it matter? If I'm trying to get something done, whether it's a democracy reform or something on climate change or something on whatever issue space, why does it matter what the political landscape is? So first and foremost, it matters because you need to know how easy or difficult it will be to get legislation you want passed. Based on what I heard from Chris, is that because it's slim majority, that may not be as easy as you might think. It also helps to know this in order to determine your strategy. How are you going to win? So how are you going to get your legislation that you want passed? And in order to really do that, few key ideas here. First, learn your key legislators. What do I mean by that? Who are your champions? Who might be the people that are out there cheerleading for legislation that you want to see, move all the way through and become law? Who are those movable legislators? People right now that, you have a few conversations, you do some things, they might move to be on your side. And then you also need to take into consideration who might be your opposition. All right. On that note, let's do a little bit of audience participation. You've heard from all of us. So here's what I'd love for you to all to do is to look up your legislators. So take a couple of minutes right now. You might already know who your new legislators are, or your returning legislators in some cases, despite big turnover, and go ahead and throw them into the chat. So who are your state legislators? And obviously we want to make a note here that we're talking about state legislators. We know that obviously we've got federal representatives. We're not worrying about them right now. We know that of course you have local people, mayors, board of, supervisors, people like that. We're not talking about them either. So we are thinking just about who's going to the state house to pass those state laws. Once you've got those legislators, throw them into the chat. And I'm guessing some of you on this call already knew. You didn't have to look them up. Got them, already, recorded somewhere handy so you can just throw them out at any time. Love it.
Had some good geographic diversity too. This is good. You were close on Van Valkenburg. It's fine.
Quite a name.
Great.
I don't feel like I'm not seeing a lot of repeats.
No, and this is step one, honestly, is knowing, especially post redistricting, making sure people knew what they were voting for, who their options were going to be, what district they were in, and now making sure people know who represents them. So the fact that you all are rattling this off is great.
And I love the when people are incoming, they're so on top of it, and I am much impressed. Awesome. All right, so now we've done some goals. We've already met some of our goals, I hope, right? So we have already analyzed the political landscape. Check. We now are on number 2. Why contact your state legislator? And I know what you're all thinking. You're all thinking, Amanda, really, this is pretty basic. We know we contact them when we want to convince them to vote a certain way on a certain piece of legislation, and that's why I would contact my state legislator. Other than that, I don't need to worry about it. And that's true, that you should definitely contact them about pending legislation. However, there are many, many, many other reasons why you might want to contact your legislator. So let's kind of go through them. First of all, maybe you don't know where they actually stand on an issue. Are they for this? Are they against this? Are they for it with various, caveats? Or are they all in, right? Where do they sit on any given idea, issue, piece of legislation? Sometimes you're going to know that, sometimes you're not. This is a good reason to contact them. A second reason, you might want to contact them to thank them for a vote. I like to use the word reinforce. I feel like it's, when you give the treat to somebody because they did the right thing, right? It's the same idea. Giving them a thank you is super reinforcing. It means that they're more likely to vote in that way in the future. Third, it gives them some support, provides them cover, particularly for those legislators who are kind of bucking the system, right? Maybe they're going against some of their major donors. Maybe they've gone against their political party. Maybe it's not even a very popular vote, but they're taking it anyways because that's what they think is right. If you all call them, contact them in some way, shape, or form, you provide them some cover, because then they can say, hey, my constituents wanted me to do this. I need to listen to the people that I'm representing. A fourth reason. Now, this one is a little bit more nuanced, right? You can move a legislator from what I call a passive supporter, meaning that they might vote for legislation that you care about, but you want to move them so that they become active supporters. They are not just going to vote yes, but they are going to cheer about it. They are going to champion it. They are going to talk to their fellow legislators. They are going to go out in public and talk about why they're supporting this particular idea. They're going to do more than just cast a ballot. so to speak, right? Cast their vote. So moving them from passive support to active support. Potentially, you can also move somebody from neutral, somebody that didn't have a position, didn't decide which way they were leaning, and you could potentially move them to supportive. You provide a little bit of information, you provide them good reasons, you can move them to being supportive. And even those particular legislators that come in who seem to be just, against whatever idea you are for, maybe you could convince them to at least not be so active in their opposition. If they know that there's a bunch of constituents that don't like their stance, maybe they're not going to be screaming it from the rooftops. Maybe they're going to be just kind of quiet about it. And that actually could be helpful as well. And then, and this is kind of the key that I want everybody to kind of, take note of, you get to start a relationship with them, a dialogue, a discussion, a conversation. This is not just a one-time only, I'm going to contact my legislator and then never contact them again. This could be the beginning of conversations that happen throughout their term. And we'll find out that you can get more done and be more effective if you're not just calling them to scream at them about a vote. If you're starting to have that dialogue and that discussion, you can probably actually be more effective when you do call about a vote.
Right. One of the things Chris just said was you got to have a relationship. It moves so fast and there's so much noise that a relationship that you've started building even a couple months in advance is going to be more effective than a cold call.
Absolutely. Speaking of Chris, we're now going to introduce Chris number 2.
Yes. Chris Lan is the policy director for the Virginia League of Conservation Voters. And he has graciously said yes to my persistent emails, to join us tonight. He's going to walk through an example, take a piece of legislation, and here's how you might message in all these different ways we just talked about. So Chris, thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to hand it over to you.
Thank you, Liz. So we're going to go through something that we worked to pass in 2021. This was the last year of a Democratic trifecta. It was a very, but even though this was a bill that we knew was likely to have more Democratic support than Republican, it didn't mean that it was going to cross the finish line, because we were asking for something very big on a very complex issue that not a lot of people had really put a ton of thought into. And this was to adopt clean car standards. Basically, the background for this is that transportation causes roughly half of Virginia's climate emissions. About a little under 3/4 of that is single passenger vehicles. EVs are hard to get in states that don't have high emission standards. And so it's hard to solve that personal emissions problem if you're just a consumer. And so this happens because of standards and supply and demand. 2 standards you can follow: EPA emissions or advanced clean car standards, 15 states, 40% of the market. And despite EVs being 6 times less polluting, yes, even when powered by dirty energy, and more affordable over their lifetime, they're not easy to acquire in states that have the base level federal emission standards. Basically, manufacturers are too busy sending available cars to early adopters, building out the charging infrastructure, and leaving states like Virginia, before it had the standard, behind to breathe dirtier air. That's the case. That is the background and the why. The reason I led with that is because if you are, as a citizen, going to your legislator to talk to them about an issue, that is not your case to make. If you remember one thing as a citizen lobbyist, as someone who's working in part of a coalition to get something done, your job as a constituent is to tell your story. The reason this is the number one most important thing is when you're delivering information to someone, you want to think, who is the most trusted voice to deliver that information? If you're asking for data on what's the climate impact, the air quality impact, what's the research background on what other states are doing, an environmental org can provide that, or good government's org for your analogs. If you're asking, but what's the impact on businesses? An environmental org might have facts, they might have information, but it's much better to get that information from the auto dealers and the people who are actually making the sales. They're going to be a trusted source. And then where do you come in as a constituent who cares deeply about something, be it air quality emissions and climate change or good government? Your trusted source is your experience, the thing that happened to you as a constituent of this person to really bring home why the things that we're making decisions on at the state level affect real people. And so that's sort of the background on the why. So an example of a statement to influence them is story-based. For clean cars, you tell them about the time you had to go to Maryland to pick up an electric vehicle, so your tax dollars went to another state. Or you tell them about how you couldn't find them and how the spike in gas prices made it hard to get around. It has to be some sort of personal nexus and story. You want to tell a story only you can tell, because you're a trusted source on your experience. Be a real person, be memorable. Your story needs to have a why about how this specifically affects you and how the legislative change is specifically going to address your needs. And then when it comes to after you've explained this, now we want to use your position as a constituent, your treasured role, to find out information. And a healthy way to do this is to say, how are you going to help me? That's the nature of your relationship with your representative. And so you can ask them, will you help me solve my problem by implementing this solution? And wait to see what they say. You're their constituent. They owe you an answer because they're sent to Richmond to represent you. And then if they say no, we don't have to go after them in this moment. Just ask them, hey, how else would you like to solve this problem? A lot of times how they answer that second question they don't have to answer for lobbyists, but they do have to answer for their constituents. Sometimes can give you some insights on like how to tweak the legislation or how to take a next step. And I think the next piece is to thank them. This is a fast-paced environment. It's hard work. You're working to sell who you are as a person. When who you are as a person is a nice person, it is easier. And so use your why to thank them. The reason that I didn't put an example here for the thank you is that who you are and the reason that you told your story is going to be banked in how you thank them. Then the last piece is when it comes to providing them political cover or working to move them, now's when you really want to think about, okay, what's my role in the coalition? Like what's going to move someone from passive to active states? 99% of the times, it's not going to be just that story. This is one thing happening. It's one piece of a really larger puzzle. Your story should serve as a catalyst or anchor for other parts of a successful campaign. You're telling your story for a reason. And one thing that I love that Mike Town taught me at the League of Conservation Voters is we don't do advocacy because it makes us feel good. We're not getting something off our chest with our story. We're doing it because we need to make change happen. You can feel free to go to folks in your coalition and say, hey, why am I telling this story? How is me telling this story going to help move this legislator? And trust me, as someone who helps organize these campaigns, it helps make us better when someone asks, why am I actually doing this? Like, is the story I want to tell and who I am as a person coming to this legislator, is that going to help? And a part of moving them is your story gives them an anchor. It gives them a rhetorical device. It gives them something that they come back to. But the thing that's going to make that stick is petition signers, letter writers, phone calls, data, key constituencies coming to them and saying, hey, we're also a part of this. As that builds up, your story might stick as the story that they repeat and pass on, the story that keeps them coming back, but it has to be augmented with the rest of the plan, with the rest of the numbers of people also reaching out. And then finally, the last suggestion is sort of to make this a connection to you. I want to treat this a little bit not so much like a subject that you have to add in, but something that you're testing your messaging against. Because you're here because of your connection to your family, your community, your business, or your district. That's what makes you that trusted source. Review your presentation after you're done, after you've got influence, find, thank, where you live in the cover and the move space, and say, and see, is my reason for being here reflected throughout my remarks? Is my presentation authentic? Is this the way that I would describe it to a friend, my mom or dad? If not, why not? Why did you choose to, like, why aren't you being authentic? If there's a reason, there may, think about it, but more often than not, your authentic story is going to be the one that you want to share. And I'd say, be you, be respectful, but be you and bring that, because that's the most powerful thing you can do as a constituent. And your job is to tell your story. All right. Thanks, Liz.
Thank you so much. That was so helpful. I took a lot of notes. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight, Chris. And you're welcome to stick around, but also a lot of this. So you're also welcome to move on with your evening. We really appreciate your time.
Oh, thank you. Thank you. All right. So let's kind of figure out where we are in terms of this training. So goal number 1 was to analyze the political landscape. We did that. Goal number 2, determine the reasons to contact legislators. We just did that. So we are moving on to learning various means of how do we do this? But before we get there, one thing we might want to ask ourselves is, how do I know where my legislator sits on an issue? How do I know? How do I find that out? Where do I get that information? So we're going to throw one link into the chat on the Virginia Good Governance Scorecard, but there are many other similar scorecards out there for various organizations. What are these scorecards? Like, it sounds pretty much like what it is, right? So it has various issues, various elected officials, and where they stand. So first place you could go is any organization might have a scorecard. Sometimes they might call it something different, a report, something of that nature that kind of tells us where a legislator sits on a particular issue. Now, of course, maybe you're really on some really specific issue that hasn't been asked and isn't listed on any scorecard you can find. So, of course, if you can't find it anywhere, and maybe you've checked campaign websites, maybe you've checked if there's been press hits about it, you've checked everywhere you can think of, and you still can't find it. We know one way to maybe find it would be to call that legislator and ask, where do you sit on this issue? So just kind of referring back to something we mentioned earlier. All right, so now we know where we can find some information. How are we going to go about starting to influence our state legislators? So again, that key takeaway that I mentioned earlier tonight, going to mention it again. You start that relationship, you start that connection, you start that dialogue, because then when you hit these other different ways, they're going to be far more responsive to you, because you have already proven, just kind of like what Chris said, you've already proven yourself sort of worthy to be listened to, worthy to think about, what are they saying? What is their point? What do they want me to do? So first and foremost, make sure you start that relationship right away. So 4 main other ways to start influencing state legislators. First, letters to the editor. We're going to go into depth on that. Calling or emailing the office. We'll talk more about that. Lobbying in person. We'll describe some methods there. And then, of course, gathering your friends, neighbors, others near you to organize and try to influence other voters in your area to also take action. Let's dive into each one of those. All right, letters to the editor. I know some of you sitting on this call are saying, to themselves, or maybe even out loud, really, Amanda, who reads letters to the editor? Are we done with that? Aren't people just checking out social media? Well, the answer is actually, yeah, state legislators still check out newspapers and letters to the editor. And funny enough, so do many of your neighbors and your friends and other people that are near you. So don't dismiss it. It actually still is a really effective action to influence legislators. More people are checking them out than you think. They might be doing it digitally, but they are checking it out. So don't dismiss. And
the other thing I would add there too, Amanda, is even if we're thinking, like, you can't even think about it in like a digital versus analog dichotomy at this point, because all the newspapers have an online edition, and legislators, lobbyists, any politico, anyone in the sphere of whatever your issue is has a Google alert. So people are going to see it who don't necessarily pick up a physical paper. So you really do have more of a reach than you might initially imagine.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. And the other thing I really like about letters to the editor is that because your friends, neighbors, fellows, and you know, who are caring about their community, they're also looking at letters to the editor, that it can inspire other people to get involved, to do things. If you include a call to action, which I'll explain in a second, oh my goodness, all of a sudden you've already multiplied your efforts because you've encouraged other people to get involved. So it does, you can kind of directly target your legislator, but then you can also encourage other people to also care about the issue. So I think it's a pretty cool tool. All right, how do you write a letter to the editor? Now, I want to just give this caveat that we could do an entire training on just that. Obviously, we don't have time for it tonight, so I'm going to go through kind of some 5 key things about how to write it and then give a few best practices. First, target papers that your targeted legislators read. What do I mean by that? If they read Small Town Gazette, and obviously I just made up that newspaper because that is a newspaper that is published in their district, then by all means submit your letter to the editor to that newspaper. If you think, oh, they check out statewide papers because that's, you know, the big one, then submit it there. Here's the deal. I recommend submitting it to multiple papers, the same letter, because you never know which one might publish it. But stick to the ones that you know that your particular state legislators are reading. Second, keep it concise, keep it short. Most newspapers are going to have very specific directions on a word count. You know, pay attention to that. Don't keep going, even though you want to. Stick to it because that makes it more likely to actually get published. If you are writing about a piece of legislation, please connect it by all means. Be explicit. I am writing this letter to the editor basically to talk about this legislation. Giving personal take, again, kind of like what Chris said with his example about driving to Maryland. Make it personal. That is going to be a much more compelling letter to the editor, both for that legislator and for your fellow constituents. And here's a little fun fact. Lots of organizations, such as the ones on this call tonight, Upvote Virginia and Represent Us, have templates on our website. So if you're thinking, I don't know how to get started doing this, we're going to help you. So we'll throw those links into the chat as well. If you're thinking, oh, I'm going to write one tonight, which would be awesome. Please do share it with us if you do, because we'd love to read what you had to say. But many organizations are out there to help you, and sometimes they have trainings around that as well. And some best practices. Again, if you know statistics that are about the district, use it. But if it's some generalized statistic that doesn't matter to their particular area, ignore it. So be focused on district-specific information. I recommend a call to action. I am calling on my state senator blank to vote yes on whatever piece of legislation. Or I'm calling on, you know, my friends and neighbors in, you know, X place to call their state legislator to tell them to vote yes on the legislation. So encourage some action from reading this. And then, of course, follow up with the newspaper. You know, you don't want your letter to the editor to get lost in the shuffle. So find out, did they receive it? Is there any more information that they need from you? Anything that might make it more likely to actually get published. All right, second method for contacting state legislators, calling and emailing. So my opinion, and you know, and I wonder if Liz would agree with this, but my opinion, calling is always better than emailing, but recognizing the fact that for some people, emailing might be the best choice for you. But if you do have a choice, I always recommend calling. That personal connection tends to help when it comes to maintaining and developing that relationship, because you hear each other's voice. Again, we do this for the same reason we wrote a letter to the editor. We're trying to influence their decisions. I kind of think of letter to the editor as being like, okay, I'm trying to influence them from afar. Calling or email starts to get a little bit more personal, starts to get a little bit closer. And as thinking about the first Chris and talking about how, you know, for some people, the next election starts in 15 months. we want to recognize the fact that for these state legislators, they are worrying about their next election. They might not say that out loud, but they are. You know, I know that some people are going to say, oh, no, but wait. My state legislator is in a completely safe district. It is not contentious. We know that, you know, it is going to stay fervently in the Republican camp or fervently in the Democratic camp. But you know what? They're also worrying about a primary opponent. So they might be worried about the next election too. And even if they're retiring, what is their legacy? They're going to be thinking about that. So always kind of keep that in mind, that calling and emailing, it works because they are worried about what's next. All right, so how to do this? First and foremost, call your legislator and only your legislator. Okay, asterisks, there might be times that organizations might give a call to action to call, you know, maybe an entire committee or to call specific legislators beyond your own. Obviously, if that is, you hear that from an organization that you're involved with, do that. But if it's just you, call your legislator. You don't have to worry about calling everybody because they're only worrying about their voters. So focus in on your particular legislators. I always recommend introducing yourself and listing the city or community in which you live in so they know you are actually in that district. Otherwise, they're quick to dismiss. And somebody outside of my district calling me, you know, I mean, I've heard of people calling from out of state to different states. Like, that's not actually effective. Stop. Don't do that. State your purpose. Why are you calling? Are you calling them to seek information? Are you calling them to thank them for a vote? Are you calling to encourage them to, you know, maybe go out there and champion a piece of legislation more than they are? Are you asking or demanding them to take a certain vote? Be clear about what it is that you're calling, but also give that reason. And this is where you can go back to that kind of personal story. Why does it matter to you? Why does it matter to the district? Again, make it compelling for that state legislator. If you get voicemail, go ahead and leave a message. They will check it. I always recommend following it up with an email though, just to ensure that there's, you know, somebody's gotten it somehow. Some best practices. If you are not somebody that does this a lot, you might want to have a script. You might want to have like a rough outline of what you're going to say, just to make you feel comfortable, make sure you're kind of hitting your points. But I always recommend you don't sound like a robot. Don't sound like you're reading word from a piece of paper. You will be dismissed pretty quickly. So again, make it personable. Sound like a person. Share something about yourself, about the issue. You're going to get much further with that. Focus on a single question or a single ask. I think some people have the desire to like, okay, I've gotten through to this office and I want to tell them all of the things I'm passionate about. And I get that. I do. But again, they're not going to be able to record all of that information. Stay focused on the issue at hand. So what is your question or what is your ask? And then keep a record. So that way, then you can kind of see how the conversations have gone over time. Because remember, part of what we're doing this for is to develop that dialogue, that conversation between you and the person that has been elected to represent you. Okay, in-person visits. Now we're getting even a little bit like, right? Letters to the editor, kind of remote, calling an email. You can still do it from your house, but it's you personally. Now we're like thinking face to face. So this gets a little bit more.
Amanda, can I flag something really, really quick before we move away from calling?
Mm-hmm.
I think that some people get very intimidated. I know I used to, and still sometimes do, right? If you don't know a legislator and they seem very important, calling them can seem very intimidating. Almost certainly they are not answering the phone. You are getting staff or you are getting a voicemail, and that's still with staff, and we're going to talk about this, that's still a very important relationship to build, but you don't have to be ready to make your case to the person, the legislator. If that seems scary to you, this initial step is probably going to be a little more of a baby step for you.
Mm-hmm. I would also even go, and I'm so glad you said that and reminded us all of that. I would even go so far, particularly in thinking about all these brand new state legislators that are, you know, soon to be taking office in your state of Virginia. they're actually probably a little nervous to talk to constituents. So, keep in mind that they're people too. They might be just as nervous. So don't, just kind of remember that they're people too. Awesome. All right. So in-person visits. Again, why are we doing this? So, it feels like a repeat, right? Influence their decisions. But one additional piece is you can sometimes get media attention. And that obviously could have a pretty significant impact in terms of influencing their decision on how they might vote in terms of legislation. So thinking about if there's a bunch of you, a group of you that's going to visit, that might catch some attention. And obviously sometimes, and we'll talk more about lobby days in a second, but when you have an organized day of action like that, you might combine it with some other things that will definitely get press attention, and that can really move the needle with some of those key legislators. All right, so how do we do this? Well, first of all, let me point out that you can have an in-person visit in a lot of different ways. I think, again, sometimes we get stuck thinking there's only one way to visit a legislator, and we're going to find out that there's more than one way. First of all, once they're in office, you can visit them at the State House. Right now, though, many of them they've not taken a spot in the State House. They're still sitting in their district office or in their campaign office. Use this time right now to go and introduce yourself, right? So you don't have to wait for, January 2nd to roll around. You can, visit them tomorrow. So you can do it in a couple of different places. I recommend, if you've got a group of people to go with you, take some people with you. That always gets a little bit more fun as well as being more effective. Recommended to schedule in advance. So just acknowledging the fact that this is going to be during usual business hours. So I know sometimes that poses a challenge, but again, that's when they're going to be around. So schedule in advance. We know, especially once the legislative session gets started, they're going to be super busy. So it's going to be really important to try to find that time where you can actually connect. And as Liz foreshadowed a second ago, that can be with a legislator or it could be with their staff. Here's a maybe not so hidden secret. Sometimes legislative staff actually know more and can actually influence the legislator, him or herself, right? So just kind of acknowledging that you want to be super nice to the staff, because you might get, further by having a good rapport and relationship with staff. And funny story, used to be a teacher. I'm sure you couldn't tell that already. And they always told me, I remember my first year teaching, be friendly with the school secretary and the custodian, because they're the people who really know how the school runs and can get you what you need. And that is true. And in this case, the legislative staff, they're the ones who can often get you what you need. So don't be disappointed if you only get a scheduled meeting with a staff member. That may actually work to your advantage. All right. Again, if you're going with the purpose of influencing them on an issue or piece of legislation, have that ask ready. It's good to have a conversation about, whatever, bill is in front of them, sure, but make sure you have an ask. I am asking you to support by voting yes, or I am asking you to reject, whatever it is. Have that ask ready to go. Don't leave and think, I had this great conversation, but I never asked him or her to vote. Don't do that. Actually, make sure you've got that ask ready. If possible, consider bringing a local validator. What do I mean by validators? I'm talking about community leaders, maybe other local elected officials, maybe somebody on that board of supervisors or mayors that we talked about earlier. Maybe they're small business owners, people that might have some influence beyond just a constituent. I recommend bringing a summary of your issue. Again, if you are trying to influence. So again, you're thinking about making that personal. Maybe you're giving some information about how it affects their district. Thinking about bringing a summary then. And again, we've said this, I think, a couple of times or in a couple of different ways, but be nice, be polite. You want people to feel good about having conversations with you. And you actually will people will take into consideration what you have to say a lot more because you've been polite. Again, we want to think about these people are often the people, they only hear from constituents typically right before a vote or right after a vote. And in many cases, they're hearing from people that might be super mad about how the vote turned out. And so they're getting like a wrath of negativity. And so they're quick to dismiss as a result. And instead, you will be the alternative, being polite and kind, and even if you disagree, and that may actually get you to be more effective in your advocacy. Again, sharing a personal story of how that legislation impacts you or your community. And just like what I said with calling or emailing, take notes, again, so you can kind of keep a record of what's been said, what's been shared. That's helpful, particularly because you are not in this for a one-time only sort of conversation, but you're in this for the long term. All right. We've got two other big methods to do in-person visits. Third or second one, town halls, right? I think we're all pretty familiar with town halls, right? This is when there's a meeting where the legislator or elected official, goes to some sort of community center and is going to talk to constituents, right? They might share, what's been going on, what they've been working on, and then they hear, concerns from their constituents, or they answer questions, et cetera, and so forth. So go, show up, right? Make sure this is particularly helpful if you're looking for, I don't know where this person stands on an issue, or I'm hoping that this legislator makes a commitment to, voting for or against a certain piece of legislation. You can get them on record in a way that doesn't feel icky or like you're trying to back them into a corner, right? So it's a good time to kind of seek information. Again, show up at one that's scheduled. I know some cases people have said, you know what, it is hard work for that legislator and their staff to organize one. So let me do that for them. Here I found a location, I found a time, I've, got, microphones and, audio visual equipment, and I'm going to let them know that they are welcome to come and meet with their constituents. Sometimes it works. And again, recommended that you prepare questions ahead of time. All right. And then the last one, which we'll talk more about, is a lobby day. So you might have heard this term, and it's one that's used in whatever kind of issue area you might be working. But this idea of having a day that is organized, it is planned out for constituents to go and speak to their legislators. So it's like you all are deciding you're going to go on the same day, usually with a specific focus and some set goals. A lot of times press gets invited, or it's an attempt to get media attention. So it becomes, it like multiplies the impact. It intensifies just that in-person visit. And funny enough, there is one that is already planned on January 23rd. I know I saw Bo on the call earlier, and he is a colleague of mine at Represent Us, and he would point out that it's easy to remember because it's 1, 2, 3, right? The first month, and then 23 or 2, 3. So we're going to throw the link,
which is also ranked choice voting day.
It is. It's awesome on multiple levels. Cannot stress that enough. We're going to throw the link to sign up to participate into the chat. Of course, if you have not done some sort of lobby day in the past, let me tell you, the people that organize these are fabulous. They make sure you have everything you could possibly need. They make sure you have training and maps and all sorts of good stuff so that you're not walking into this like, and in fact, there will be, more training to follow regarding that. And I think it's super fun because you go with a group of people and you feel really awesome about having done something together to advocate for issues that matter to you. I don't know if Liz, if you want to say anything further.
No, I was just going to add, I know there's folks from some other organizations on this call. If your organization knows the date, has a scheduled lobby day, knows the date, feel free to throw that in the chat. Feel free to share those opportunities and links with this group as well.
Awesome. Awesome. Yeah, I recommend doing things as much in groups just because it's fun and you get to debrief together and talk about your conversation that you had and how awesome it was. So a really fun way to kind of do an in-person visit. All right. And then last but not least, when talking about ways to, contact your state legislator, is that you can always multiply your efforts. I mean, I think that's part of the reason that organizations like Upvote Virginia and Represent Us exist. It's because we think everybody individually, they can be helpful, but a group of people together can be super compelling and super, can be inspiring and motivating for those state legislators. So, all right, let's say you are feeling really pumped, and I hope each and every one of you are feeling really pumped. I want to not just contact my state legislator right now, I want to help others to do the same. And I'm sure that's what everybody on this call is thinking. So how do we go about doing that? I start small. Start by having conversations, friends, neighbors. How do they feel about issues? You will find out that a lot of people probably feel just like you do about whatever issue you are passionate about. Then, yep, you already got a group. Then plan a group action. So some suggestions, taking pretty much everything that I just went over and doing it in a group format. Have a letters to the editor writing party where you brainstorm what are you going to talk about? How are you, can you read mine? Does it make sense? What do you think? Where are you sending yours? I'll send mine to someplace, right? You can do it together, becomes a lot more fun. Calling party, particularly awesome, like right before a vote so that you're getting things in at the right time. Again, plan that office visit together. Attend a town hall together. Maybe in this case, you've got multiple questions. You can sort of divide. This person's going to ask this question. This person's going to make that comment. Make sure that you're hitting all of your key points. Attend a lobby day together, perhaps one on January 23rd. And of course, you can always find organizations that are out there that are working on issues that matter to you. Again, much like maybe the ones that are on this call. So we'll throw some links into the chat about that as well. So you can always multiply your efforts, and that makes it not only more fun, in my opinion, but also more effective. All right. So how successful is this? Liz is going to give an example of how actually successful contacting legislators can be.
So many of you on this call were working with One Virginia 2021 last decade when we were working on redistricting reform. And that lobbying effort, that years-long lobbying effort, took many forms. There were different bills tried. We threw a lot of spaghetti at the wall to see if anything would stick. And we found that consistently the kind of trifecta that would happen that could turn a no to a yes in a legislator, right? And this is an uphill battle because we are inherently trying to get them to make their own lives a little harder. So in order to bring about nonpartisan redistricting and gerrymandering, take the map drawing pen away from the legislators, we knew that we're asking them to do a hard thing. But we found that if we had 1,000 people in their district, in their House district, maybe a little more for Senate, but either way, 1,000 emails in a state legislature is a lot of emails on, especially on a topic that isn't a hot button issue. And we had, an action form. Many of you are familiar with it. Someone could fill out our form and we would send the automated email on their behalf. So automated emails they're on to us now, right? They're on to organizations sending these form emails. So they're not as effective as if you just write a personal email like Amanda talked about earlier, but 1,000 of them was very hard to ignore. And this didn't have to be in a week or a month or even in the same year. But if we had this consistent drumbeat in their inbox of this issue that they tried to say no one cared about, and they tried to convince themselves no one was paying attention to, but 1,000 is hard to ignore. So even if it is just that baby step that you all take, as Amanda said, a group is always more effective than a single voice. So that was one piece of it, kind of that real groundswell. Another piece of the puzzle was having an opponent mention the issue publicly, making the legislator speak on the record to this issue. Again, there's a handful of issues that are going to be discussed in every campaign. We got the high profile issues. We have abortion, and we have guns, and we have education, and we have, and then there's kind of the ones that go in and out of political fashion. But we know the ones that are going to get discussed. Then there's the specific things that a lot of us work on, and whether that is maybe climate change gets talked about, but maybe electric cars don't get talked about, or maybe voting rights are talked about, but maybe not this specific measure. So getting someone on the record about a specific thing that they hadn't had to speak to previously is very important. We had one legislator flip from a no to a yes. He won his election with 70% of the vote. It wasn't competitive, but it did not matter. His legislative opponent, or his campaign opponent, made him go on the record repeatedly. And he couldn't just say, yes, I think gerrymandering is a great idea. He had to say, well, no, that does seem bad, and I guess I should support a way to fix it. And that became very effective. And then the third piece is that relationship piece, right? Was a one-on-one or small group tete-a-tete meeting with a trusted validator, a local person or a friend or a donor or someone who really can get a few more minutes than just your average voter, and really start with that level of trust where they can say, this is a good idea. Here is why I know this is a good idea. Here's why you should think this is a good idea. And really give them that political cover. I mean, cover so many of the goals that we've already talked about. And I'm not saying this is magic, but it is pretty hard for them to ignore that kind of input and that kind of advocacy from so many directions. So that was our magic formula for flipping legislators on redistricting reform. I hope that if you're not trying to pass legislation that takes away a power they really care about, maybe that number goes down. But a critical mass of grassroots outreach, I would say, is that third piece.
Awesome. Thanks, Liz, for the example. I think it's helpful for people to hear that this advocacy really does work. It really can make a difference. Otherwise, why are we here talking about it, right? But we actually have seen it work in reality. So let's kind of revisit where we've been in this training. We started out by analyzing Virginia's current political landscape. Then we talked about reasons to contact your legislator, and there's many of them. We've just gone over a whole bunch of different methods or ways to contact your legislator. Now we got to figure out how to develop an effective message. So messaging. This is the part I think that people start to get a little nervous about. I know I do sometimes, because it's like, oh no, what am I going to say? How do I know what to say? And then I start fretting and it doesn't go well. And then I remember that there's some things that I can use to help me know what to say. So first, again, use the resources that are out there. Lots of organizations have talking points. Coincidentally, we've got some links here to Upvote Virginia's Get Informed page and to Represent Us's policy platform. We've done some of that work for you in terms of what's this all about. So use those resources. And of course, if you are here because you want to advocate for lots of other different issue spaces, look for other organizations. They have similar pages like ours as well. So, look at what resources are already out there. One piece that I always kind of stick to is like a really sort of core piece to any message. So I think about putting it in a problem solution format. So if I can state what the problem is, and then I can talk about how this legislation or this reform could solve it, I've done pretty much what I need to do. So again, I want to think about what is the problem and how does this legislation or this reform go to fix it? I've done a lot right there. I also try to make connections. What do I mean by that? We want to connect the message to the legislator's district. So how would or does this impact the people of the district? Again, remember, these are people that are going to be worrying about their next election. So you want to kind of keep them thinking about that by bringing it back to their home turf, or in your case, your home turf, right? Again, if you've got statistics about your district from reputable sources, don't just throw out random stats, but if you have statistics, and the teacher in me, the former teacher in me always reminds people, use more than one source and double check those sources. I always feel like I have to say that. But if you have them about your district, go for it. And connecting it to something you know that they care about. That usually does a lot. And thinking back to Chris's example about driving to Virginia and not having a place to deal with his electric car, make it personal, right? So if I can do those things in my message, I'm gold. So again, use the resources that are out there. Think about it in problem and solution format. Make some connections and keep it personal. You're going to be set. All right, so we are already on step 5 of this training program, which is next steps. So first and foremost, you can always reach out and join an organization that is working on issues that matter to you, right? I know, for example, Liz would welcome each and every one of you. If you're not already connected to Upvote Virginia, she's like, please come join. We'd love to have you. Of course, I would highly recommend signing up to participate in Democracy Day. It's going to be a ton of fun. Again, January 23rd. Easy to remember. And I would not be me if I did not ask people to take a call to action, to follow a call to action right now. So we are going to leave this call not only feeling inspired, not only feeling ready to take, huge next steps like joining an organization, participating in lobby day, maybe visiting your newly elected state legislator, but you are going to take some action right here, right now. And we're going to make it super simple for you. So we're going to ask that people are going to email their legislators. Oh my God, don't panic. Here's what you're going to say. First of all, you want to introduce yourself. Remember, you are starting this relationship, this dialogue, this, connection, this conversation with this person that you are going to be connected to for at least 2 years, right? So you want to think about that. This is a long-term deal. So introduce yourself, state where you live. You might want to offer congratulations. That's a super nice message. Congratulations on being newly elected, or obviously in some cases on being reelected. Maybe you're curious. I don't know much about where this person stands on an issue, so this is an opportunity to ask them. I'm really passionate about X issue. What do you think about it? And of course, you want to convey the message that you are super excited and you look forward to communicating with them a lot during their term. It doesn't have to be a long email. It doesn't have to be, you're not writing a book. It can be a short little paragraph, just simply to start that dialogue. All right. So of course the question's going to come in. How do I find information about where and how to email them? This is where I'm going to turn it over to my Virginian friend, and she's going to let us know the best course of action for finding out those email addresses.
So anyone who's following the chat can see all of us going, but where are the emails? And they're all going to change. And all of the Senate emails are going to change because they're based on district numbers. And there was redistricting. And I have done my best to put together a Google Doc. I have, I think, out of 140 returning / incoming legislators, I think I have all but 6. I think I got 39 senators and 95 House members, and I will keep trying. So this is a combination. I do not make any promises about this list, but it's a combination of their current legislative emails, whether they are a senator whose email is definitely going to change, or a House member who's now going to be a senator. I gave you their House email because it still works. These will work for at least a little bit longer. Or in a lot of cases, it's their campaign email. So there's a lot of info for Virginia. Not for John Smith on this call. He can't run for office. I need him. But there are plenty of places to start. I will, and we will, our team will continue to update this list as new information comes out. We will put this on our website, but if you hang on to this link, that Google sheet will also auto update. So again, I'm sorry if you are in one of the 6 districts that I couldn't find. A lot of them don't put their campaign email on their campaign sites. It's a strange trend. But this is a good place to start, and we will just get more specific information as it comes in.
I recommend for those people who are in one of those 6 districts that maybe what you want to do is draft the email, and then as soon as that email address comes up, you can quickly throw in the address and hit send. So I'm going to stop talking for a couple of minutes, which always feels a little bit awkward when you're leading some sort of training, but I want to give people an opportunity to do this before we move on to the next step.
Carolyn, I really like what you said in the chat that she also thanked the Also Rams for giving me a choice. And I think that's a lovely idea. While you're reaching out to these folks, I mean, I think there's at least 3 I can think of off the top of my head, and I'm probably missing some. There's at least 3 incoming legislators who have served in the past, lost an election, and now are back. So just because they lost this time doesn't mean that they won't be either a legislator or just someone to have a valuable relationship with in the future. So again, these relationships, having a reputation as someone worth listening to, I think is huge. So I love that idea.
Me too. Maybe we should include that next time. And of course, I have one final piece for everybody, which is a very short evaluation. I think it's like 5 or 6 questions. We'll throw that into the chat as well. We would love to know how we did on this training. Did you get something out of it? Did we meet our goals? Right? Did we analyze the political landscape? Did we talk about why you should contact your legislators? Did we talk about how? Did we talk about messaging? Did we provide you with some next steps? Were we inspiring? You can lie and tell us we were, even if we weren't. No, I'm just kidding. Be honest. We'd love the feedback. We'd love to know, because that helps us for future trainings, and appreciate all of the great comments, great participation. Oh no, it shouldn't. Okay, let me check on that. Pause on that, please.
While Amanda's doing tech support, I just again want to, I don't feel like I did proper introduction in the beginning of Amanda Putz, who is the state director for Represent Us. She does so much education around the country, both with the state leaders like me and with voters like you. I mean, just everybody all over the civic engagement spectrum. And she and Rep Us do such great work. So I just want to thank Amanda and thank Rep Us again for being here with us and for taking time to present all this incredible information.
All right, this tech support might need to be more beyond my pay grade. It is in our public folder, so I'm not sure what the problem is. That said, we have all of your registration information, so I will certainly follow up. I know that Liz also mentioned that we'll send out a video link, so we can do both at the same time. We'll send out the video link as well as a working survey, and appreciate everybody for coming, for sticking with us. Can't thank you all enough.
Yeah, when we'll send the slides out as well.
Yep.
We'll include that. Because I know I've learned things. I've taken a lot of notes. I'll be excited to go back through those slides. So thank you all so much. I hope we'll see you, a lot of you, at Democracy Day or other lobby days. Thank you, especially those of you in other organizations who joined us this evening. I hope this was helpful, and I really, really appreciate your time tonight.
Thanks, everyone.